Chapter 53 Vineyard Monster. At the loss of born-again innocence, with the death of a sparrow by his hands, and emboldened by the use of firearms, the rifle became the answer to all Paul's problems, and the vineyard became a killing field. Squirrels, rats, gophers, even the covey of quail Paul nourished with the vineyard's drip irrigation. Everything was fair game. The spiritual vacuum caused by the swallow's departure was filled by ravens that darkened the daytime sky and spied over the land from tall trees and telephone poles. When Paul witnessed a raven steal macadamia nuts from his trees and place them on the road for cars to crack open, he fetched his rifle. When the blackbird flew overhead, Paul aimed, pulled the trigger, the shot rang true, and the raven plummeted to its death. "Nevermore," said Paul, "nevermore." He went outside to irrigate a section of vines begging for thirst, removed the green lid covering the water valve, and discovered a family of mice. Mother Mouse looked up at Paul and pleaded for mercy, showing him her infants latched to her teats, squeaking in trepidation. He raised the rifle and blasted the mices to pieces. Roadrunner heard the shot and dashed up the hill to investigate, and with a pull of the trigger Paul accomplished in a second what Wile E. Coyote couldn't in a lifetime. Beep beep, your ass. Then a red-tailed hawk floating on thermals passed over Paul, who pointed his rifle skyward, aimed, and squeezed. Click. The chamber was empty, and the hawk soared out of range before Paul reloaded. His eyes caught movement in the lavender fields of a cottontail bouncing above purple buds. He raised the rifle, aimed, and fired. The rabbit fell, and Paul walked over to inspect his kill, but found her spinning around, unable to get up. He had blown off her ear. Not wanting to let the animal suffer any longer, he picked her up, held her head firmly, and with a quick circular motion as if spinning leaves of lettuce dry, used centrifugal force to snap her neck. She lay still on the ground, paralyzed, heart beating, taking shallow gasps. Paul looked down at the rabbit, whose eyes peered at him, asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" Paul recognized her face, the same rabbit he had fed a few days before. He finished the job with his shovel. As Paul buried the rabbit, his conscience was troubled. He brought death to a rabbit he had cared for, cutting and placing tender shoots on the ground for her and other rabbits to eat in the defiance of his wife, who insisted the vineyard floor be kept clean. The next morning, when he went outside, he noticed a brigade of ants on the march, and he followed the trail. He found a swarm congregated in one spot. What could that be? He prodded the black pool with a stick and saw ants devouring the rabbit's shot-off ear. His throat choked as he remembered his dog, who showed mercy to a baby bunny, and tears of guilt streamed from his eyes, cascaded to the ground, and flowed downhill, joining other tributaries of his remorse, into a river that cleansed the slippery slope on the hillside of all the blood that was shed. Paul entered the winery to inspect the Tempranillo he had struggled so hard to defend on the vines. He pulled the bung from the barrel, stuck his nose in the spout, inhaled, and the smell was good, wonderfully good, the result of 10 years' experience with this grape. He noticed angels had sipped more than their fair share as he neglected to top the barrels, so focused he was on guarding the grapes, and as he poured in topping wine, a lingering tear of his regret fell into the hole. Making wine is blood and tears, unaware the depth of his sorrow would occur a month later, when he inspected the barrel, and vinegar assaulted his nose. When Paul lost his dog, he lost his touch, and the second year he made wine untouched by Bluey was also a total waste, and he prepared to return it to earth. Every beginning winemaker is taught to keep the barrels topped. When there's a pocket of air, headspace in the barrels, that's when wine begins to go bad. Paul, distracted, lazy, and a sign of mourning, didn't keep his barrels topped properly that year, and his desire to use the least amount of sulfites, commendable, without measuring properly, foolish, didn't help. This was the winemaking difference between Paul and Carrie Ann, who was diligent and methodical to the point of having topping days marked on her calendar, and who invested the time and in the equipment to perform accurate chemical analyses. By following correct processes, she saw rapid improvement in the quality and consistency of her wines and increased sales, while Paul had a barrel of tears. "Why don't you distill the wine you ruined?" Sheila suggested. Since she had returned from the gates of heaven, he had started listening to her more, and they transformed a barrel of red ruin into 10 gallons of clear distillate, cleansed of impurities and sins. They nicknamed it grappa, but in reality it was akin to French cognac, since the distiller they hired ran it through the still twice. "Cognac is for export, Armagnac is for friends," said Sheila, who reminisced about her time in Gascony, the land of D'Artagnan, hero of the Three Musketeers' adventures. Sheila insisted on buying a new French oak barrel for their distillate, and read up on craft distillery techniques. "Don't cut it yet," she advised. "Keep it at full strength to absorb oak flavors faster." And with a small barrel of cognac in her garage, turned into a winery, and a matching barrel of Armagnac, which was distilled only once, leaving the liquor with more aromatic and complex flavors, it became a staple of her happy hours when she went to the gazebo overlooking the grave of her dog, whom she served water and treats, watching the sunset below the Pacific, sipping eau de vie, the water of life. To hell with wine, she thought. We should make brandy. This will sell. The wine of blood and tears had been redeemed through distillation, and for the cleansing of Paul's soul, there was nothing like work in the vineyard, where the vines washed his guilt with their leaves and restored his spirits with soothing songs. He also liked their Armagnac. He called it Bluiac, after their dog, and started experimenting with limoncello and liquors infused with pomegranates and other fruits from their orchard. The next summer, as the grapes approached the climax of ripeness, they begged and pleaded to be made into good wine and not sent to the still. With grapes this good, Paul reasoned, some will go for the blush wine, and the rest for the best Tempranillo ever made. And if it doesn't turn out great, then it's off to the fires of the still, and it will make great Bluiac. The time for the glorification of the grapes arrived, and Paul gently lifted the veil of the bride to behold her lovely smile. He kneeled to the ground, pulled down her fishnet stockings, and entered the cave under the wedding gown to taste her heavenly fruit. "I don't want to invite a lot of people to pick this year," said Sheila, when he returned to the house to discuss harvest dates. "I'm tired, and I don't want to cook for everyone. How about if we ask Miguel to organize a crew? Then we won't need a party." "What if we ask Alex and his buddies and put Miguel out of business?" So they called in the Marines. Alex, with 7 of his buddies from Camp Pendleton, harvested the grapes, as Miguel observed from the top of Joe's Hill, fuming from the insult, but finding solace in his conclusion. Those gringos can only do the easy work, knowing Paul must inevitably call him for other tasks, because work in a vineyard is never finished.